Do you want to break away from the 1 in 3 Americans with zero saved? Does that describe you? Learn more at themarcusgarrett.com/invest with / personal finance club, or scroll down to your video or podcast description right now. And back to the show. Welcome back, everyone. There's probably some music playing there, and hopefully that flew in natural as I'm trying something new here. And we're going to talk about the milestone of having children. I alluded to it earlier about the women planning for the age jumped out at me. I'm not going to say the fiance's age. She's not here. I'm still looking like she's usually like behind the screen here. When I say something that I know is going to grab her attention, she turns her head over the couch, and I'm so paranoid and trained, I still look, and she's not even here at the house right now. But so I'm not going to say her age, but the age in the book that the doctor gave, it struck me as young, was like 34. Like 34.
Oh, when the character who is considering freezing her eggs should come back. That's yes.
So either what did you learn or research from that, or kind of what are your thoughts on that very clear, to me, sounding young delineation?
Well, that's one doctor and one example. I will say that first. But wait, I need to back up a second, because so I had been talking to you before your now fiance lived with you. And to what you're saying rings so true, because when she moved in with you, our conversations, I was like, oh, Marcus, is your girlfriend there right now? Like, I can tell. There's someone else there with you.
A little bit tighter in the throat.
It was very funny. And I was like, oh, we're gonna have to do this, whatever.
Can we reschedule this call?
Yeah. So that's hilarious. But yeah, so the character in the book, her name's Abigail, and she thought that she would, be married and have children by age 30. And, she, started to talk to her doctor at like 29 about freezing her eggs. And her doctor said, you've got some time, come back when you're 34. And she was 34, and she didn't have a romantic partner that she wanted to have children with. And so she decided to freeze her eggs. And I had been looking for a woman who had done this, and specifically looking for a woman who'd done this outside of New York and LA, where it's more common. And she's in Nashville. And she took me through her experience. It's not that common in Nashville, period. And it's not that common for a single woman to be going through fertility treatments like she was. But she said her friends were very supportive, but she still felt isolated. But the interesting thing with her, when I started to keep talking with her, freezing her eggs only made her more interested in having children. It didn't give her that, like, okay, now I can wait and, shelve this and take my time. She just realized that once she started, she was ready to do this. And I don't want to spoil her story either, but we just kept toggling back and forth between, is it more important to me to find a romantic partner first, or is it more important to me to try to have a child right now? And, I watched her for over a year struggle with this decision and not knowing what she truly wanted to do, or maybe knowing it, but not ready to say it. And it's such an important decision, as any woman out there knows, and man too. I mean, Marcus, we talked about this all the time. That's the biggest decision. That's a decision you can't take back.
Yeah, kind of to interweave my own thoughts and story. And it was actually, I read this before we started, probably maybe even years before we started having these discussions. I read an article. It had to be, and it's funny you said this, it had to be either New York Times or LA, because I feel like no other paper could get away with this. And it was interviewing wealthy men on the other side who had chosen, they got to successful place in their position. Obviously, usually doctors, dentists, like long-term careers. They get to the other side, but now they're late 30s, early 40s. But the whole purpose was they purposely selected to do surrogacy. And so these men were just raising children. And it was a black doctor. I remember this specifically because, again, representation matters. And he had adopted 2 daughters. And he was just like, I wanted to have children, but I was less sure that I wanted to get married. And I had the wealth and means to do so. And I wanted to provide. And I'm not sure if it was a surrogacy for him or adoption. But the kind of the takeaway I had from that and tying to Abigail's story is, you know, it was interesting when she froze her egg. She said she felt more comfortable there, like she had more time, and it was like a less panic time frame. I felt that same way. Like just reading this story, I like, because it was a concept. First of all, I didn't even know could like I'm, you know, I first of all, I'm not Dr. Wealthy, but at that time it was something I was aspirational for. Or maybe I'm a hypocrite and I'm just scared to say that I'm not in the middle class. But I was like, you know, that gave me comfort, like that the race doesn't finish based on these arbitrary milestones that are placed upon us from the 50s and permeate our society. But yeah, I related to that comfort that she had, like, okay, this elongates the race, so to speak, the marathon, if you will. And then if I may, if you want to go into this story, and I understand if you don't, with Abigail's case, it seemed to be another decision point was for her. If you don't want to tell her specific story, but there's a point in the story where COVID had an effect on her life. So if you want to tell hers, or just kind of talk about how the pandemic and COVID changed either you wrote this book during the pandemic. How did that change these milestones in people's lives?
That's a really good question. As we were sitting here talking, I completely forgot about COVID, or the COVID was a part of this. It's so normal to be sitting here talking on Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had finished a draft of the book and really thought I was very close to finished in February 2020. And then, of course, everyone knows what happened at the end of February and the beginning of March 2020. And we didn't know how long this was going to last, what kind of impact it was going to have, how it was going to affect anyone. But I knew immediately that I wasn't done, not even close to it. And I remember, after a month or so into the pandemic, reaching out to all of you guys and saying, like, I need to know how you're feeling about this. I need to know what your life is like, if this is changing any of your milestones. Like, we need to keep talking, basically, because this was, a moment in the country, in the world, that no one had ever been through. And I had all of you guys telling your stories in real time. So, I mean, very stressful to have to rewrite the book, but also very cool to be able to look at an event that we never expected, that was essentially like reaffirming this idea that, your adulthood doesn't have to be on a certain timeline and may not get to be. And here's how you survive and hopefully thrive within that, because, the pandemic just delayed everything even more. Postponed weddings, the birth rate is even lower now. Economically, it had huge effects, and people moved back in their parents' homes, and some of them never thought they'd do that, but they did, or people moved to different places entirely. I mean, I think all of the people's stories that I told in the book, like, were impacted by the pandemic. Some in really meaningful ways, and some in smaller ways, but still, like, it changed a lot, especially for people, in their 30s, trying to figure out these milestones.
Yeah, I definitely, I've shared a few times. I feel that, and this could be true for a number of people, that I didn't come out of the pandemic the same. And what I mean by that, like, literally fundamentally how I approach life, day, work, focus, what's important to me, and some of the timelines in which things need to occur, fundamentally shifted for me during the pandemic. But I felt like that was more true because of kind of where I was at the intersection of my life as well. So in my case, let me go back to the checklist here. No children obviously jumps out. Completed school, left home, financially independent. So 3 out of 5, unmarried, no children. And so, hey, let me be very clear. It's not a challenge. This is a grading scale. This is not a sliding scale. People are like, who does he think he is? Checking out 3 out of 5, or writing in. Please leave a 5-star comment. I got 5 out of 5. Marcus, where you at? So it's not a competition, but it really shifted for me. And I'm trying to feel how transparent I can be about this, although I try to be transparent on the show. I'll just say I had a recent conversation and someone had asked me what I'm trying to, it'll be obvious. We can talk online about why, but vague on purpose. But someone asked me why I was or was not excited about something. And the question itself caught me off guard. I wasn't prepared for it. And I'm the type now, just in learning about myself, somewhat through therapy and just somewhat through age. Like I think something doesn't bother me because I compartmentalize everything. But now I know if I'm thinking about it 3 days later, like, oh, actually, I was bothered by that thing. Or sometimes something will bother me on Monday, but I'm so busy. It's just kind of hovering in the background, like, yeah, I'll be here waiting for you when you're done. And then I slow down on Friday. It's like, remember Monday? And I was like, oh, man, I thought I forgot about that. So I kept thinking about this question. And I had no answer for them, which was a bad thing. And what I realized is it bothered me because it was a good question. It's like, Marcus, why do you keep pursuing these things that do not excite you? Like, the show excites you. I've got mentors, I got advisors, I got people that just care about me. Someone called me this week, someone texted me this week, like, oh, here's some exciting thing for you that you should do. Here's some business you can take on. And as we talked about in the book, like, I've been trying to grow this business, although that's scary and terrifying to take this on as a full-time job without the security blanket of biweekly checks. And I guess the simplest way to explain it is it's fear. One, because it's unknown. But it's like, am I in a position to be that adult and advise other adults, because, I don't have it all figured out and determined as well. It's been an interesting dynamic, but it's like, maybe I should do the thing that excites me, and I'm doing all this as a transition to the quote that I pulled out of the Financial Independence Milestone or chapter. We put up with companies treating us poorly because we don't believe there is another option. And I thought that was an amazing quote. It's like one sentence in the book. But I would push on that, and this is an opinion I want to get from you, either from the stories or your own, is there another option?
I mean, look, like, the facts are that we don't have the same kind of protection that employees had decades ago. Our salaries also aren't rising with the cost of living. And gig work is only getting bigger and bigger, and the same protections with gig work aren't there as they are with full-time employees. So, it's very bleak to say we don't think we have another option, but work isn't the same. Our careers aren't the same as they used to be. And, there's a certain amount of freedom in that, like you're experiencing right now, where you can, have your passion projects and have your side work and be able to do that along with, a more secure job that you may be less passionate about. But it also comes with the drawbacks of, less financial security, less career security, just less support by companies. And so we have to thread that needle and figure out, how to be happy in what we're doing. And you and I talked about this, and I think it's in the book, but you said it so great when you were like, I find it annoying about myself that, like, I want to love what I do.
Right. I feel like, it's very millennial.
Your dad is like, just go to work, and you're like,
it's not that complicated.
Has to be more. Yeah.
It's not that complicated.
And I think so many people do feel that way, but, wanting that also, there is that trade-off of you're maybe not going to have the financial security that someone who, 20, maybe longer than 20 years ago did have when they, went to work every day at the same place for decades and decades and had a pension. It's just the way we work is very different now.
Yeah, and this lesson is in the book, but it's phrased a different way. It's basically being overwhelmed by choice. Because I have a former coworker that would call me a hypocrite right now, because we had a whole argument. He was ahead of me, mind you. He was older. He's listened to the show. He's probably gonna curse me out for sharing that. But he was like, I do think that a portion of your work should make you happy, and it should contribute in your portfolio of happiness, and it definitely shouldn't make you miserable. And I was like, that ain't the purpose of work. I still had my dad maybe ringing him. I was like 27 at this time. I was like, that's not the purpose of work. Like, work is your job description and to pay your bills. Like, if you're not unhappy here, that's on you. That's your responsibility. But I don't feel like that work is maybe not the purpose of work, maybe purpose of work to be happy, but it's not the job's responsibility to make you happy. The job's responsibility is to provide for the job description, give you a paycheck like they said, and you agreed to when you got hired. And he was like on the verge of irate. And we had a lot of conversations like this. I still consider him a good friend. We were like, BFF. We were work BFFs at the time, so we were always having nonsensical, pointless debates at the proverbial water cooler. And this was one of them. He like stormed off to his cubicle. Marcus, a lot of them ended with this, and we'd go to our respective cubicles. And but the quote from the article was talking about being overwhelmed by options, and it's something I've seen, especially in the financial space, which is a little bit maybe why I've been hesitant about coaching, or maybe I'm just, I guess, fearful or scared to do so, is when you have two options. So they talked about the 1950s. Those 5 hallmarks were very simple to follow because there wasn't a social media to check in and see what the rest of the world, let alone the country, and you just had the Joneses, keeping up with the Joneses across the street. And number 2, it's like, well, everybody's doing it. So everyone, like school, marriage, kids, finance, home, kids off, maybe or maybe not get divorced, pay off the house. I'll say retire. There's probably another way I could go with that, but I'll say retire. So it was very clear. And the summary for that to me is when you have the way the human mind works is when you have 2 choices, you go, oh, well, I have a 50% chance of being right with 2 choices. And if you argue now, and it's much more than this, that we have 10 choices, the way the mind works is I have a 90% chance of being wrong. Not a 1 in 10 chance of being right. It's a 90% chance of being wrong. Do you have any thoughts or context about like the overwhelming, or are we overwhelmed by the choices we have for our lives?
I wouldn't say we're overwhelmed. I do think it's tough, and I do think it's stressful. There was this script for adulthood, those 5 steps, they were a script, and you followed them. Even many gay people got married to people of the opposite sex because that was part of the script. Women didn't say, do I want to have children? They had children. And so there's a certain comfort in that, right? In following a script and just checking things off and going through. But there's also a lot of loss that's not talked about. Well, first of all, there's this idea that the 50s and the middle class then it's very idealized, but you have to think about who was benefiting from that. And the answer is white men. Black people and other people of color were left out completely of the middle class. There were government policies actively designed to keep them from buying homes or to keep them from getting a job where they could be management. And also women only had entree to the middle class through marriage. So this idealized middle class adulthood, when you really break it down and look at it, it's not so idealized. And so the fact that now we don't follow those scripts and there is more opportunity and more openness in how we look at our adulthood, it is tremendous. We're the first people who really did get to say, well, what do I want? What are those milestones? How are they important to me? Society has changed and there's not that much of a stigma. I mean, there's some, of course, but in choosing to not do these milestones, they're all sort of falling away or being relooked at and rethought. And so there's a lot to be said for having these choices and feeling like they are the right choices for you and that this is how you want to live your life. But I also think the stress and anxiety in getting there and figuring it out can't be discounted. It is very hard to, make your own map or figure out how you want to get from where you are to whatever your ideal future point is. This is very stressful. And Marcus and I, we talked about this a lot because, it wasn't like you were dating a girl who, lived 3 streets over. You were dating someone in another state and you had to figure out, well, how does she get here and still hold on to her career? And how do I keep my career? And where are we going to live? I mean, you had all of these things to figure out because you were 2 adults, trying to make your ideal adulthood and also figuring out how to do that together. And that's a lot more complicated than just I'm 21 and I like this person from high school. I will marry her, but the upshot is, although there is lots of stress and anxiety in getting there, psychologists say that when we do figure these things out, we're happier in our work. Our relationships are better. We're better parents because we've really struggled to get to these places, which I think is a very hopeful note. And I really always like to tell people that, no matter how just some of these things may be and feel, you're doing the right thing by taking your time.
Yeah, I now have two follow-up comments on that. I'm trying not to go dark because you went on the upshot, so you went positive. So I don't want to come in dark. Here's the cloud. So let me see if I could salvage this. I'll end with the fiance. Maybe that's a good way. But on the, I think. I don't know if you phrased it this way, but someone told me, as it pertains to money, the magic number is 30% more. So if you talk to somebody who makes $30,000, they need 30% more. If they make $300,000, they need 30% more. If they make $3 million, they still need 30% more. And I thought it was fascinating through all the stories, no matter where they were in their journey or how many boxes they had checked off. I don't know if that's uniquely American or uniquely human. Like they always more. Including myself, even in my own story, like it was, and I had to check myself because it was some advice from my therapist that I've gotten away from because I stopped going to therapy. Not in a bad way, I just with the pandemic and everything like that. I'm the same way. Like I don't appreciate. I'm a journey runner, so I like to run the race, not host up the trophy. Like if it was up to me, and I have a very real example of that, when I graduated, I hadn't even got my graduation gown. I had my feet kicked up. I was at the house chilling. I was just happy to graduate. It's 5 years, and I graduated during the summer too. And my mom was like, "Yo, when's graduation?" I was like, "I don't know. I think it's this weekend." She was like, "There is no way in hell that we paid all this money and I'm not going to see my son walk across." I'm like, "Man, I don't want to walk." I had to rent I had to scalp rent my thing. Like there was people selling them outside the venue. I think I had a XXL. I think I'm a medium, maybe a small at that time. But she forced me to walk across that stage so she could get the graduation photos of her baby.
Yeah.
Another fascinating point on that day, which I still remember, and it's interesting what you do and do not remember. So I come out, I walk, which I didn't want to do anyway. Come out, the family that they could invite in the 48-hour warning that I gave them. So it's basically the ones that lived in Texas are there, hugging everybody. There's a photo of this, and then I think I look upset. My mom's like, "So when you getting your master's?" I was like, "Man,
come on!
I still got this oversized gown on, and you asking me about my master's? Masters? We talking about masters?" Still don't have my master's anyway. I'm sure my mom would point out and retort. Maybe she'll put a 5-star comment to point that out. So I'm going to have to skip ahead in the interest of time. But there's one quote that I definitely had to share because I just thought it was hilarious. It was Miller was talking about his student loan debt. And I'm going to end with marrying for the people at home. "I've come to think of my debt as like an alcoholic relative from whom I'm estranged, but who shows up to ruin happy occasions." And he had talked about how he had just come to peace with this debt that will potentially haunt or hang over his head for the rest of his life. So I thought that was great. So please read the graduating from school chapter. On the marrying side, a quote that I pulled from there is two things. And it's everything that was okay at 29 feels behind at 30. And that one jumped out at me. I was like, man, it is like that is the false starting line or finish line of adulthood. So everything that's okay at 29 feels behind at 30. But maybe this is a positive spin. I'm not really sure. One doctor you interviewed quipped that adulting, which I thought was fascinating, did a whole research seminar on that, like these terms of art that exist, and they had to come from somewhere. Like you interviewed or spoke to the person who literally coined the term adulting, which I apparently steal all the time. Hope I don't owe him some copyrights. But she was talking about the adulting finish line based on these 5 parameters for adulthood from 1950s is later than ever and growing later. However, we're living longer than ever. So the doctor said, I think it was a psychologist, that the time to be an adult is longer than ever. So I'll turn it over to you for any thoughts or maybe your conclusion from what you learned from this book and this story.
It was interesting when that was pointed out. The point is that we don't start all these milestones, or we don't have all these milestones if we choose to get them at the same time they did in the 50s. They were checked off, in the early 20s at the latest. But since we are living longer, we will have the same amount of time living with these milestones that an adult in the 50s did. So if you're feeling uncomfortable, that is a way of looking at it that's not talked about that much. This time you have, this longer time you have at the end of life. And because the more interesting story is obviously how the younger ages are shifting, but you shift in the older ages too. And we're gonna get there, hopefully, if we're lucky. And then I also think wait, sorry, Marcus, I lost my train of thought. What was the second part of what you asked me?
I guess it's just what's the grandiose conclusion? What's the takeaway from how 30-somethings are redefining adulthood?
I think another expert in the book said to me, which also really struck me, because I was saying, what is all the hand wringing about, really? Why do we think that we have to have these things checked off? Like you read, like when you turn 30, you think I should just be an instant adult. So why do we think that? Why do we expect that? And when you really break it down, the idea is, like, say you're not married, well, then you don't know how to have close relationships with other people. And but of course I do. You don't have to be married to have close relationships with other people. Or, the idea is if you're not settled into your career, then you don't know how to work hard. And it's like, but of course you do. You're working hard at figuring out, what is the career for you and what is the thing you want to devote yourself to. So, we are adults even without those milestones. And that's something that, I think people know, but you still are looking toward this external framing to really feel like a valid adult, but you don't have to. And in fact, I think the more mature thing is to look at yourself and figure out, well, what do I really want to do? Does this milestone matter to me or not?
I love it. I think that's a great one to end with. We are adults even without these milestones. Especially since I ran through the checklist myself earlier, and I just happen to love checklists. Hope to have you on the show again. Whether it's, I think you were alluding to that. Is this going to be another book or another story? You also, thank you for you put me in a New York Times article, so I can now say I see you in the New York Times.
I did, yeah. And if anyone is, Marcus again was very helpful. But if anyone out there is. It was about how do you sort of restart after this pause of the pandemic?
Oh, yeah.
What if you're feeling stuck? It will offer you advice about how to take baby steps into going after major goals again.
And I'll get that in the show notes for you.
Yeah, I'm not trying to say you need my help, but I wrote the article to help myself, and I found it quite helpful. So if anyone else out there is looking for reassurance, I think it's useful.
I like that. I like the reassurance piece. And to that point, where around the web or the social medias can people find you?
My website is KayleenSchaefer.com. Twitter, I'm Kayleener. Instagram is I Know Kayleen. So yeah, or just find the books on Amazon or your indie bookseller, anywhere books are sold.
And thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for being in the book. You guys should read the book to find out more about Marcus than he may reveal on this podcast.
There's no need for that. And fade.